Greetings, Wambui Bahati here. Wambui made it. Today, we're going to be talking about yarns. I think yarn school just started. Welcome to Yarn School. This is for beginners. This is for someone who is not familiar with the yarn world, or someone who may be embarking on one of the yarn crafts and just wants to feel a little bit more comfortable with yarn terms and the yarn that they may choose to use for their project. Now, I think we all know what yarn is. This is yarn. Yarn is made up of fibers, short and long, that are fashioned in a way to make a very long, continuous string or fiber that can sometimes go on for many, many yards. Now, when we go into the store and we're in the yarn section, I believe this is the most familiar package that we think of when we think of yarn. We think of something like this, something that looks like a giant peanut. Well, this is called a skein. And this skein can be used just directly as it is. You can reach in, usually you can reach in, and somewhere in the middle you can find the end of the yarn, and you would pull that out. And right from that end that you would pull out of the skein, you can actually start loom knitting or working on your project just from, if you find the end of that yarn that is, well, here it is right here, the end of that yarn that is in the skein, you can actually just start making your loop or however you want to start your project, and you can start working on your project, leaving the label on even, and just go ahead and start working. Now, that works great for a lot of people who do crafting with yarn. For me, it doesn't work so great, and I still sometimes seem to get my yarn tangled when I start by using the yarn that's coming out of the end of the skein. So for me, I prefer to go ahead and when I get my skein, I wrap it into a ball. I make it into a ball like this so that I have seen the whole length of the yarn. I know if there are any tangles in it. And for me, it just helps to avoid tangles and frustration down the line. So you can choose to make a ball or not. It's up to you. I personally recommend you making the ball. Now, there's also something called a hank. Now, when you see the beautiful yarn that is wrapped like this in the twist, this is called a hank. And I think hanks are very beautiful. Now, when you get the hank, though, you don't have a choice as to whether or not you want to work right from the hank or you want to make it into a ball. Let me tell you, if you buy a hank, and hanks are usually hand-dyed fabrics or really high-end fabrics sometimes, and I just think they're gorgeous and they feel good, and I really love how they look when they're all twisted up. But if you decide to work with a hank, you don't have a choice. You need to make a ball. Now, if you're buying the hank from a dedicated yarn and or knit store, they usually have a means where they have a device where they can take your hank, and if you ask them to, they will take your hank and wind it into a ball right there in the store so that when you get home, you already have the ball. If you are ordering your hank from online, or you're getting it from someplace other than a dedicated knit or yarn store, then you really want to make this into a ball before you start trying to work with it. Without doing so, you are asking for trouble. These are going to get tangled so fast and so easily. So the hank must be made into a ball, okay? So that's our hank. Now, there are some companies that actually sell balls of yarn, and I would say that this right here would be considered a ball of yarn right here. So you have your balls, you have your skeins, and you have your hanks, all right? One word that we hear often in the yarn world is the word weight. Now, in the yarn world, weight does not mean how much a skein or ball or hank of yarn might weigh in pounds or ounces, in the yarn world, weight means the thickness or thinness of a yarn. Generally and usually, we have 0 to 7 as our main weights. So I don't have a 0 here, but I do have a weight 1. And as you can see, it is very, very thin. And just because a yarn is very thin, it doesn't mean that it's fragile. This yarn is very substantial and very strong, but it is very thin, and it is considered a number 1 weight. And then we have a number 2. I'll compare them with you. Is this 2? This is a number 2, and this is the number 1. So the pink is 2, and so you see the pink is already just a little bit larger than the 1 weight. And it continues like that. This is 3, so you have 3 is just a little bit larger than the pink. So this is 2 and this is 3. Let's go like this. Let's go all the way. So here is 3. Where is my 4? This is 4. All right, and we see that 4 is just a little bit larger than the 3, of course. And it just goes in order like that. Here is my 5. So we have the 4 and 5, and you can see that the blue, which is the 5, is just a little bit thicker than the gray, and the gray is the 4 and the blue is the 5. And here is 6, and so we have the blue is the 5, and of course this one right here is the 6 weight. So weight is about thickness. Now I also have a weight that is 7. This is a 7 weight, and this is the royal velvet that we used in a project a few videos back, and this is the royal velvet, and this is on the package it says it's a 7 weight. But I also want to show you something else. I have something Bernat Blanket Big, and on this it also says that it's a 7, but I want to show you this. Look at this. Look at this, how thick this is. And this is considered a 7 as well. There is an organization called the Craft Yarn Council. They do many things in support of the yarn crafts. But one of the things that I'm most impressed with is one of the things they do is they are about the business of trying to make sure that the manufacturers are all on the same page. For instance, if I buy a Lion brand number 6, what they would like to ensure, and they're working toward this, and I think doing a really good job, is that they want to ensure if I buy a 6 from Lion brand, that if I go to Red Heart and I want a 6, that I am indeed getting the same thickness. So there are councils and organizations out there that are trying to make it a lot easier for the consumer to get exactly what they intend to get, no matter who the manufacturer is. There is a lot of great information just on the label of the yarn. Not only is it telling me that it's a weight number 5, it also suggests a number and or letter of a crochet hook that would be ideal for this weight of yarn, and it does the same for knitting needles, suggesting which size knitting needles would be best for this weight of yarn. What's missing? I don't see a picture of a loom, but I think we can figure that out. Also on the package are the care instructions for this particular yarn, and it also will list the fibers or what the yarn is made of. For instance, this one is 100% acrylic. It also tells where the yarn was made, and sometimes it even has different patterns inside the label. So there's lots of information on the label. One word that we hear a lot when we're talking about yarns is the word worsted. We hear worsted weights. What are worsted weights? Well, worsted weights are simply the medium weights, the weights that come right in between. Well, remember I said weights generally go from 0 to 7. Well, right in between there, the 3, 4, and 5, those are the worsted weights. These are the yarns that are most often used to knit our scarves, our hats, and our sweaters. Our worsted weights are medium weights. Another word we often hear when we're talking about yarns is the word ply. What does ply mean? Well, ply simply refers to the strings or the yarn that is used and twisted together to make one yarn. Here is our yarn, but when we unravel it, we see that there are really 4 different strings in here that make up this one yarn. So we would call this pink yarn a 1, 2, 3, 4 ply yarn because it is made up of 4 single yarns that are wrapped together, twisted together to make this one yarn. Now the ply, it doesn't matter how thick or thin a yarn is, it does not affect the amount of plies it can have. I'm saying this to say that the thinnest yarn can have several plies, where a thicker yarn may have less plies. So the amount of plies does not depend on how thick or thin the yarn is. That brings me to the types of yarns that there are. Oh, there is not enough time for me to even list them. There are silks, there is bamboo, there is cotton, there is acrylic, there is wool, there is polyester, there are wool blends, and it goes on and on and on. And within each one of those groups, there are several types of yarn. Now, from the craft store, I usually get a acrylic yarn. I like working with acrylics because it allows me to wash it and I don't have to be very careful with it for a child's hat or even my hat. I don't have to worry about it getting dirty or whatever because it's made from acrylic, and so I can just toss it in the washing machine and be okay with that. If you're making something really, really special and you're going to spend a lot of time and do intricate stitches on it, then it does pay to step up your game and to get a yarn that is worthy of the time that perhaps you're going to spend on it. So don't skimp when you're going to make something really fabulous. Really go for it. Which also brings me to the novelty yarns. Please don't leave the novelty yarns out, because this is an example of a novelty yarn. It's just different. This yarn is, let's see, it says it's a number 5, and it is made of acrylic, polyester, and metallic. But look at how fancy it looks. Now, I'll tell you why I like these novelty yarns. And here's another yarn that's an acrylic, but it has little flecks in it that makes it just look special. Now, I love these yarns because you can use one stitch. You can know one stitch, the Loom knit E-wrap stitch or the Loom knit knit stitch. You can make a hat using that one stitch, but because you used a yarn that was so fancy and flashy and exciting that it's really going to add something to your hat. And the fact that you only use one stitch, oh, and I forgot, that also includes our velvet yarns, because the yarn itself is going to take your whole project up another step. So you can use the most basic stitches. You can be a beginner, but if you use a yarn that has a little excitement to it, then your product is going to be that much more exciting. So at this time, I will announce that our first official yarn school class is over. Class is over. You are dismissed.